Good evening, everybody. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Matter. How's everyone doing? Excellent, great crowd. Thank you for coming out. Welcome to Matter. My name is Arun Bhatia, Senior Program Director here. Many of you might remember, this was a program that we had originally scheduled for back in January when we all were going through the polar vortex. And as Sean mentioned before in our roundtable, there's about 100-degree difference between that day and today. So we got a much better crowd, and we're actually open today. So thank you all for being here. Many of you know about Matter, obviously health tech incubator here, working with over 200 startup companies and a number of industry partners in the pharma, med tech, health space, health system space, and payer space. As many of you know, a core part of our mission is the work that we do to help innovators, whether it's coming from big companies or small companies, transform and translate their ideas into solutions that can meaningfully sort of move the needle in healthcare. And so it's really exciting when we are able to bring in guests and speakers who can significantly speak to that. Also, as many of you know, much of the work that we do is in the digital health IT space, but transforming and translating ideas into solutions pertains very much to life sciences as well. And having come from the life sciences side, this is an area that's of great passion to me. We're really honored to have not just a guest, but a moderator as well, who know a lot about this space. And as I came up in this ecosystem, one of the things we were always talking about is how do we put Chicago on the map? How do we put the Midwest on the map in terms of a life science and biotech hub? And one of the things that keeps coming up is we need wins. We need to demonstrate that we can do this, demonstrate we have technology, demonstrate that we have talent, and demonstrate that we have wins. And the two people who are here tonight can very well speak to that, very expertly speak to that. So I'm very excited to have them. I wanted to share, Sean, you'll hear a little bit more about his background. He's a product of Abbott Life Sciences, came up, was a co-founder and CEO of AveXis Therapeutics, and we'll hear his story. And many of you know that was recently acquired by Novartis in a very successful exit. And we also have Jeff Aronin this evening as our moderator, who knows a thing or two about successful exits as well, having come from Ovation Pharma that sold to Lundbeck. He is also the president and CEO of Paragon Biosciences. And in one of his more prestigious roles, he is the chairman of the board here at Matter. And so he has and shares a very strong and equal passion for really moving life science assets and developing our life science community. So we're really excited to have both of them here joining us tonight. Please remember, questions will be taken through matter.socialqa.com, so please go on your phone and your tablet. Ask as many challenging and hard-hitting questions as you can, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Sounds good? Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeff and Sean to the Matter stage.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right. So I'm really excited tonight to get to interview Sean Nolan, who has done a great job of building the life science industry here in Chicago. He's a great professional executive, but he became an entrepreneur and has a lot of, I'm sure, great stories and a great background that we can learn from tonight. And after I'm done, we'll be taking questions as well. So feel free to email or however this is done. So we were about to do this last time. It was about the coldest day of the year, and you picked one of the best days, so this worked out well.
Well, I figured if we did it on the day we were supposed to, it'd just be you and I sitting here. I think it's about a 130-degree swing between dates.
So Sean and I have known each other for a long time. We started working together in 2004. But before that, you had a great career at Abbott, et cetera. But I think it'd be great to hear about your early days. You're from Chicago, from Chicagoland at least.
I am a Chicago guy. I'm from Libertyville. I still live in Libertyville along with my wife and 4 kids. And, one of the things that I'm so pleased about Matter and what you all are trying to accomplish here is building the life sciences in Chicago. And, when I was a kid, there was Abbott and there's Baxter and, very, very few healthcare opportunities and things have evolved over time. And there's more and more companies as a result of success that's happened locally. And I think it's all of our desire to see how can we continue to accelerate this and leverage the talent, the expertise, and frankly the capital that exists in the Chicagoland area to build more companies here and a brighter future for the state, but also for ourselves and for our employees and families.
That's great. Well, you certainly contributed in what you've done, what we did together early on. But let's go back to your early days. What helped you become a great executive? I've seen you work. I know some of the things you do very well. I noticed that you went to John Carroll University and you played hockey. Mm-hmm. How did that experience, maybe talk a little bit about your early days and how those experiences helped shape you into the leader you became?
Well, listen, I think everyone's got their own story. Not everyone in this room, by virtue of the fact that you're entrepreneurial, you're very competitive. And people have different outlets for that, whether it's sports or whether it's other things that you find interesting. But I think it's really just harnessing that competitive spirit in a positive way, in a constructive way, so that you can work with people. I think one of the most important things is you have to have conviction in what you do on a daily basis, but you also have to have, at least in my opinion, a little bit of self-doubt. And personally, fear of failure is probably the biggest driver for me. I never wanted to let anyone down, including myself, whether that's in sports or whether that's in work. And so, you may not be the smartest or the best person on the team, but you can always work hard, you can always prepare, and you can always work to be a good teammate or a good leader of people. And I think that's something that's fundamental if a company is going to be successful, that you breed a culture that's going to reward certain types of behaviors. And that culture is something that can differentiate one company from another. And to me, an example of that is, one of the things that we really felt were important at AveXis, and it's honestly the only reason I ever fired people, wasn't because they weren't technically proficient, it was because they weren't culturally a good fit. And that's where I made a mistake, is potentially I hired the wrong person. And so you really want, I believe, people first and foremost that have high integrity. They do the right thing. And how they do it is very, very important to them and to the group. Number two, you want to, at least I believe, you want to make sure that the people are transparent and honest. And what I mean by that is, an example at AveXis is our biggest challenge in front of us was how do we scale gene therapy manufacturing to the level that would supply global demand. No one had ever done that. People were able to make doses at academic institutions that could treat 10 kids or something like that, but how do you address the world? People told us we couldn't do it. So you needed to find people that had a mindset that they were going to be very solutions oriented and they were going to work together, because no one person could figure this out. You had to have scientific expertise with manufacturing expertise, with quality and regulatory to work in concert, or you were never going to conquer this in a very timely fashion. And so what I always share with people is we have to run fast, we have to run hard, but we're going to fumble the ball. We're absolutely going to do that. And it's absolutely unfair to ask people to run fast and run hard and never make a mistake. I mean, that's how you breed people running slow and never moving the ball forward. So if you were able to bring people on board that wanted to do that and then would actually walk in your office and say, we have a problem. What we thought was going to happen didn't, and we're probably going to be stepping back a couple of weeks. That puts you actually forward faster than if you would have waited 3 months to bring that to the forefront and have a real discussion about it. So I believe that's where making sure that from a team perspective, there is that trust and that respect and that recognition that it's okay, we're all going to make a mistake, will absolutely make a major competitive difference for your company, and you'll actually be able to hire more people of that mindset that allows you to be more efficient and more effective over time.
Yeah, that is a great example. I remember you were a very good team leader. People followed you, and that certainly does help as you build companies. Because, I know you've been with companies that had thousands and tens of thousands at Abbott, and you've had companies that had 4.
Yeah.
So maybe you talk about, as a leader, how do you get people to follow you? How do you build that culture? How do you build that? How do you get someone to leave a giant corporation where it's safe and comfortable to go take a risk to a company that's 4 people?
Well, first of all, from a leadership perspective, I don't think that there's any magic to leadership. I honestly think that you just have to be real, and I always try to be real. And I think one of the things that's important is for somebody who's in a leadership position to, first of all, say, I don't know everything. I don't. And I'm going to make a mistake. And if I made a mistake, I made sure, I actually would highlight it so people could see. I just acknowledge that I made a mistake. I think we've all probably worked for people that if there was a mistake made, you could lose your job. Like, we're all perfect. I know everything. If you're in a situation where you're trying to build value, do something that hasn't been done before, start a company from the ground up, that is the fastest way to create major problems for yourself, in my opinion. So I always try to just let people know that we're gonna make mistakes, but what's gonna get us past it is having a solution for that problem and talking to each other through it, and that's what we were able to do. And so I think that what it ultimately does is it fosters a trusting environment where people understand what the guardrails are, and it's okay to make a mistake. It's not okay to make a mistake that you could have controlled, right? Some things you shouldn't make a mistake on, but certain things are you're innovating. You're going to have those things happen to you. So letting people understand that that's going to happen and that's okay, I think is fundamentally important. I think another aspect is recognizing the contributions that people make. I think the best thing you can do as a leader is give credit where credit is due. And I think we've all been in situations where someone's out there elbowing and making sure that they're always the person that gets the credit. And that's not the way to foster teamwork. That's not the way to engender folks wanting to work harder, because we all want recognition. It's human nature. So I think it's very basic human needs that you just try to make sure that you're sensitive to and you live by. And if you walk the walk, that's more important than someone talking the talk. And I just believe if you do those things, you increase your chances of success. And I actually believe you increase the satisfaction of people within the company, and they feel empowered to do more than they normally would have. And if you've hired the right people, they'll leverage that. And that's where it goes back to, if you don't hire the people that fit that type of a culture, you got to get rid of them. And I think if you do that, the people that are good and they're working hard and they're living it the way you want to, they see that. That's motivational. So to me, it's be true to what you say and what you believe, and reward people who are doing the same.
That's great. And you've talked a few times about hiring the right people. We've worked with a lot of the same people. What do you think about when you hire talent and bring them in to work with you? What are you looking for?
Well, at a small startup, I think it's very important from my perspective, which is in the biotech space. I wanted to hire people that were successful at big companies, because big companies are great at teaching you how to do things the right way. There's a lot of process. There's a lot of really smart people. You know what good looks like. But I wanted to marry that with people that had been successful at startups, because that is a very different environment, as you all know. If you don't have a staff of 35 people to do something at a startup, and that's what your expectation is, you're going to fail, right? And so I've seen more people not be able to make the transition from a big company to a startup than I have be successful. So I wanted to make sure that I had people that could bring those two sets of experiences together, because the mindset that you have to have as an entrepreneur and starting a company is so different than what normally is rewarded at a big company. And that's not a value judgment. That's just a reality, right? At a big company that's been around for 100 years, there's a lot of process in place, and basically people are oriented to, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to screw up the system. Where if you're starting something from scratch, or you've got an idea and you want to build a company around it, it's really, I need to take some risks. I need to be smart about my capital deployment, and I got to be willing to accept I'm going to make a mistake. Those are totally, totally different. So finding those people are incredibly important, because if you put the wrong person with the wrong mindset, they might be technically very proficient, but they can't get out of this, we have to solve a problem, we have to work across teams. They're going to be such an anchor on the organization and such a frustration to the people that want to do a good job that it's highly non-productive. So as all of us in this room are entrepreneurs, and we have certain things we can control and certain things we can't control, right? I mean, you oftentimes can't control ultimately if something you believe in is going to work or not. Right? If there's a new medicine that's being developed, you don't know oftentimes until the phase 3 trial's done. Right? It could take years. But you do know, and you can control your people in terms of your hiring of them and your firing of them, if need be. And fundamentally, I believe if you've got the right people, you increase your probability of success, and you decrease the time to get there in a major fashion. So in my opinion, the most important thing you can do is hire the right people.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And I also agree, the skills that make you successful at large corporations aren't necessarily the same skills that you need, but often you can take those best in practice principles and apply them.
Absolutely.
And so you learned a lot of those best-in-class principles at Abbott. Mm-hmm. So you went there after university, and you had quite a career. You were in the commercial side of the business.
Right. And where I'm from in Libertyville, you could see the Abbott A lighting up the night sky, all through your school years. And I will say, when I went to Abbott, it was 1991. The division that I was in, which was the pharmaceutical division, was selling erythromycin and had revenues of about $200 million. And 14 years later, when I left, we were launching Humira, and revenues are $5 billion. And so the growth was just absolutely amazing. The opportunities that were afforded were incredible, and the people were I have nothing but positive things to say. They're brilliant people, worked really hard, and I learned a ton. And Abbott was great to me. They're putting me through Kellogg, and you're kind of on a track to a certain place that was very attractive from a lot of reasons. But I got to a point where I just said, this isn't really as fun as I thought it was going to be. I can keep doing this, and I'll have a nice life. But I wanted to test myself. I wanted to really put, I guess, myself on the line to see, if I had a key position at a smaller company, could I really make a difference? Could I create value? Could I ultimately help patients more so than I could at a larger company? And I honestly, I dealt well, I think, politically. I mean, there's some of you in the audience that I've worked with. I think I pretty much got along okay at Abbott. It wasn't like I was a bull in a china shop. But I didn't, I mean, there's a lot of energy you have to take to finesse things at a big company. And at a small company, like, you know, when Jeff and I worked together, and Tim and some of us, you know, you're sitting around a table with probably 5 people, 10 people. And you put the issues on the table, you talk them through, a lot of argument, but ultimately you get to a place and everyone breaks the huddle and they go. And I like that, and that's really what attracted me to, you know, getting into the more entrepreneurial space, and ultimately what led me to Ovation was I wanted to do something that fit that bill. And I'm certainly glad I did that.
Well, so am I. It worked out great. But you came in on a commercial role, but you quickly built that, our CNS division, and then you expanded into even helping our operations clinically, which really gave you even a broader perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I came in as a commercial person. I think I actually told the story earlier that I started, and again, we were focused on a few very small assets, and Jeff said, hey, look, you're the new guy. Why don't you come in and take a look at what we're doing? And basically, if you think there's something we can do, let me know, if something different. And we had been focusing primarily on oncology. I said I came back after about a month, and I said, listen, you know, a couple things that we should consider are, number one, it's hard to get these oncology assets. And number two, none of us really had a lot of oncology experience, but we had these assets that you'd acquired, the CNS assets. And we had a lot of CNS experience. So we really started to focus both development efforts that really were transformational to the company in terms of value creation, and BD efforts to be focused in these CNS areas. And Jeff certainly created the opportunity for us to do that, and you know, we were successful in making that happen. You know, one of the things that was interesting about the Ovation experience is that, again, I came up on the sales and marketing side primarily, and we had a situation where our lead development compound was going before the FDA. And we had some internal, I'll just say, changes that had occurred. And so we were gapped in terms of how we were going to manage this whole process of going through. We had a 2-day FDA advisory committee meeting. We knew that was on the horizon. And we were gapped from a medical perspective at the time. And basically, Jeff and Tim Kniff, who was our head of regulatory, and I sat down and we just said, okay, we'll figure this out. And so Tim and I really partnered on this, and I learned so much about the regulatory aspect of how you move things forward, how to position the clinical data, and I think the commercial view that I had helped in terms of how we laid things out. And we were able to get 2 unanimous votes on 2 separate days, and you know, that was the proudest accomplishment I had from a professional perspective, because ultimately what we did is we got a product approved to treat children suffering from these infantile spasms that would basically devastate and negate their ability to ever have normal cognition. And we got that approved. And that just changed my whole perspective on what you could do. You know, what a person could actually do working with a team and believing in a mission. Because a lot of people told us we couldn't do it.
Right.
And we did. And it also taught me, I should say, it reinforced certain things, because that was a situation where I didn't know probably 90% of what was going on, because I had no experience in it. But I was able to ask questions and learn from Tim, who knew how to do this, and we worked really well together. I'm a good arm twister if I have to, and so we had to twist a few arms and get everything where we needed to. But that was really one of those things that, to me, opened my eyes to what can be, the possibilities. And I think that was a harbinger ultimately of leading to AveXis and what we could do there with gene therapy.
That was a great story. I do remember. We ended up getting 4 drugs approved, and that drug you're talking about, we had, when we ended up years later, the head of the Epilepsy Foundation's child was on that drug, and he came in and talked about it, and his tears were in his eye that his son was doing so well, which, that was very rewarding. But, getting those drugs approved is always one of the most rewarding experiences. But it's also a very scary experience when you're in development, because you don't always, I say we're in the risk business. Because as much as you think you never know what a drug is going to do when it's in humans, when it's double-blind placebo trials. So you're taking as much data as you can and making very good assumptions. But you've done this now with multiple companies, from Reata to Intermune to AveXis, and you're making judgments on the products. How do you think about that assessment? How do you think about not only the science, but maybe the patients that you're treating? How do you do the math and figure out, you're getting a lot of offers to go work for a company. How do you decide which one do you think will be the most important, most likely to succeed?
Well, I'll use AveXis as the example, and to me, I always look at things first and foremost as what is the level of unmet need? And the higher the unmet need, obviously, the greater the opportunity. So at AveXis, the initial potential indication was for a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, which is essentially the infant equivalent to ALS. So these babies are born with a defective gene, and as a result, they don't produce a protein. And without that protein, their motor neurons die, and then they essentially lose their ability to walk, to hold their head up, and eventually breathe. You basically suffocate to death. I mean, it's awful. And 90% of these children don't make it to their second birthday. And there was nothing that was approved for this. There were some things in development that subsequently have gotten approved, but you could tell that they weren't going to be curative. They weren't going to really transform the disease. So step A is there still an opportunity here? The answer was clearly yes. There's a big opportunity here for these patients and their families. The second thing was looking at the data. So from a diligence perspective, when you looked at the preclinical data, it was consistent across species. So normally, as you know, mouse data can look good. But then as you go up species, right, you get into dogs or pigs, and then ultimately non-human primates, things go back down normally. But in this particular instance, the data got stronger as you went up the species, which is strange, but encouraging. So I thought that was very critical. The scientific founder, so the person that discovered that the AAV virus, we used AAV9, which is a serotype of this non-infective virus, he made the discovery that it crossed the blood-brain barrier, and he wrote the article in Nature. So he was the scientific founder of the company. So that also was very helpful in that there's no one in the world that knew more about this particular circumstance than the scientific founder. And when he and I got together, we were very simpatico. I mean, the worst thing for a potential CEO is when the scientific founder wants to be the CEO, and that's just bad. It's just, in most cases. Sometimes it can be really good. I'm not saying never, but oftentimes it can be troublesome because it's their baby, and nothing can ever be wrong with your child, right? So he and I got along really, really well. And the last thing was there were some initial, the investors that had gotten in about 6 months before me, I knew. And they were very smart. And they called me and said, hey, this could be something for you to take a look at. I reached my own conclusion, but it made me feel better that these people who are brilliant had reached a similar conclusion. So I felt that this was something that had enough there to start. And my view is if you have a 51% probability of success, that is super high in our field. So to me, there was enough to take a risk. And the bigger driving force, to be frank, was I have 4 kids. It took me back to what we had done at Ovation, and you had the opportunity potentially to take what was a death sentence and potentially modify that to some extent. We didn't know to what degree, but it's one of those situations where going back to, I have an opportunity to make a difference. This could be a big difference if we do it right and we get some luck. And that's why I was motivated to go there.
That's great. Well, it was a big chance you took. I mean, I think you've got a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience, and I always get the question, when should I do it? Is this the right opportunity? And you never know, but what you did was what entrepreneurs have to do, which is at some point you get at the end of the diving board and you have to take a leap because you believe in the mission so much. And you believed in this mission. And one of the other things that I think can go overlooked is you were going into now one of my companies is a gene therapy company now. But remember, our company is now, you did this 4 or 5 years ago when it was early in the gene therapy days. And that was not a proven technology. How did you think about that part of the process?
Well, you're right. Most of you probably know a name, Jesse Gelsinger. And Jesse Gelsinger was the first patient dosed with a gene therapy in the US. This is back in 1999. And he got adenovirus, so he didn't get AAV. He got a different type of virus. And they injected it. He had a massive immune response and died. He was 18 years old. And so for 20 years, the field really didn't move forward because there was such a fear of what could be the reaction. And what got me comfortable was 2 things. The first is this discovery of AAVs, their associated adenoviruses. There was a fair amount of data, at least preclinically, that they looked to be a lot safer. Number 2, Dr. Kaspar had been doing this for 10 years, and he had looked at every serotype. There's hundreds of serotypes, and he felt that in his lab, AAV9, for what we were looking at, was as safe as you could possibly be. Yep. Then I talked to a few of Dr. Jerry Mendel, who's really the clinician. He's the person that dosed the initial children. And he said, listen, these children are going to die no matter what. And he said, I believe there's enough preclinical data to justify what we're doing here. I would dose my own child if they had this disease. And I basically, talked to my wife and I said, it does come back to, would we dose our own kids? And I said, based on what I know about the disease and based on what I know about this new therapy, I would. And that's what ultimately got me comfortable it was, from a head perspective, there was enough data to say yes, but then from more of a heart perspective, it just made sense. And you said when you look at the calculus, you try it out.
Right.
ultimately, when we dosed these first kids, I mean, everyone held their breath. I mean, you're giving trillions of particles of virus. So your biggest fear is an immune response, and secondly is what's going to happen to the liver. And we thought we had figured out a way to mitigate that by giving steroids, 24 hours in advance and over 30 days, and then weaning them off, and it really did help mitigate things. So sometimes you do have to jump off the diving board, and I just feel blessed to have been part of something where I was working with some brilliant people that had dedicated, the better part of 20 years of their lives to creating this technology.
Right. And that's a great example of taking it. A lot of this gets down to when we're developing medicines, we're taking risks. I remember we often would debate not only the drugs we were developing, but the drugs we didn't develop, because that meant some children wouldn't get medicine, wouldn't get a drug developed. So there's a lot of these challenging decisions that you end up making. So after you did this partnership and you moved to Chicago, which I think was a great thing for Illinois and for Chicago, you raised capital, raised additional capital. I know a lot of the entrepreneurs are going through that now. You want to talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, well, just to set the context, the company was formed in Dallas, Texas. So there are 4 employees there. The IND was held at Nationwide Children's Hospital. They were doing all the, if you will, the clinical and regulatory work. There was no one in the company that really had any pharmaceutical or biotech experience. They were Texas oil guys, it's the strangest thing, but it's true. And God bless them for starting everything. But when the investors that I mentioned got in, they said, okay, look, we got to put in a management team and let's grow this out. So my only request to the investors was, we have to put the company in Chicago. Because I'd been commuting out to San Francisco and Dallas for years, and I said, I don't want to do that. And we can build a good company with great people. And one of the investors, and these are like top flight guys, so I'm not going to name names, but the guy says, look, okay, I mean, you've got a good track record, we'll let you do that, but there's no talent in Chicago. And I said, well, then why did you pick me as a CEO, And I said, I'm offended that you said that, and I think I'll prove you wrong. But their viewpoint clearly was, you had to be from Boston, or you had to be from New York, or you had to be from San Francisco, or somehow you're just not that smart. And anyway, there was a great focus on bringing the team together, and so hired the management team out of the characteristics that we've talked about thus far. And I can tell you that I'll get to the money part in just one second, but after about 18 months of company performance, both in terms of just delivering on the milestones, exceeding Wall Street expectations, I got a phone call from that investor, and he said, I'm wrong. He said, there's a lot of talent in Chicago, and he said, I actually used to just make my investments based on technology. And he said, I've learned that management matters. And it's a bit scary that that's a statement, but he was being honest. And I think what it shows is, going back to, if we can control who we hire, it can really make a difference. So to get to your question on the finances,
I always say, by the way, there's more good technologies that don't become successful than there are average technologies that do with great management.
I think that's true.
So a lot of that's a great story, because a lot of great companies never make it because the management team isn't able to move it over the finish line.
Right. I mean, listen, you can get into a Lamborghini and drive it into the wall, right? I mean, so Seems obvious to me that management matters, but everyone goes at their own pace. So actually, when I got to AveXis, there had been a total of $20 million of capital put into the company. And it was all basically through friends and family money. And so we had to raise money quickly. And so we did a mezzanine round. We raised $65 million. So we started in June, and in September we did $65 million. And what was really interesting is we literally just called who we knew. And my first call was to Taimur Tamadan, who at the time was running the pharmaceutical sector for T. Rowe Price, and I knew him. And I called him and I said, hey, here's what I'm doing. And he says, AveXis. He said, I swear I've looked at this company in the past. It was just really early, but it sounds like it could be really cool. And I said, I think so. And so we met, and he says, I'll lead the round. That never happens, right? I mean, it's like you gotta talk to 1,000 people, and we were able to get a really good syndicate of fantastic investors for that mezzanine round. And then we came to we had a board meeting in December of 15, and we had to make a decision, in my opinion, and that was, do we invest in our own manufacturing capability, or do we outsource it? And everybody had been outsourcing it, and still are. And I talked to every CEO that would take my call in gene therapy. I talked to CMOs. I talked to investors. And I said, what's the biggest issue with manufacturing? And they said, well, no one knows how to do it. So I thought, well, if no one knows how to do it, why would you pay a CMO to do it, right? Like, they don't know how to do it. And I'm just a pragmatic person from Chicago, right? So what we decided, I said, well, look, our chief scientific officer has made more of this virus than anybody in the world. So I said, Brian, if we partner you with Andrew, so Andrew is our head of manufacturing. He had been like the number 2 guy at Hospira, and he'd been at Amgen, so he knew how to make biologics at scale. And then connected him with our regulatory and quality guy. Said, you're the triumvirate. No one makes a move without the other 2 being on board. You guys get together twice a week and then with me once a week. And we're going to go from academic scale to commercial scale. And I want to do it in 12 months. And they all informed me that was completely insane. But I said, look, that's what we're going to try to do. And as a result of that, we needed more capital. So we needed to raise we knew capital-wise we needed about $60 million for a facility. And we did an IPO in February of 2016 and raised about $100 million and started the process. 15 months later, we were running engineering batches for GMP. So what these guys did was absolutely incredible. It was all on them. I think we created a framework and a culture where, we could move things forward. We had our bumps, trust me. We had some days, that's for sure. But the point was there was the right mindset involved and the willingness to recognize we were going to make mistakes. And so, through that time, the manufacturing was progressing, regulatory discussions were progressing, and the clinical data, was maturing. And we continued to raise money. And, I talked with a smaller group earlier about just, at least in my opinion, how important credibility is with the investors. I mean, again, it sounds pretty straightforward, but, I just think the more you can, as they say, under-promise and over-deliver and just be honest about what's going on. And, someone says, I remember I was with somebody early on, one of the investors, and I was talking to Taimur at T. Rowe Price. And he said, what's your biggest concern? I said, manufacturing. I said, no one's done this before. And we got to make more than anyone has ever dreamed of. And so we walk out the door, and the investor's like, "Why did you say that?" And I said, "What do you mean, why did I say that?" You don't tell someone what your concerns are. And I said, "I do. I mean, what am I going to tell them? Nothing bothers me? You know, like I got everything by the tail? Like what you know?" And I shared the story with Tamor, and he said, "If you would have told me nothing bothers you, I wouldn't have funded the round." So it just reinforced to me, you know, you got to be as transparent as you can. I mean, particularly once you're public, you have to manage things in a particular way. You can't get too far over your skis. But I think as a result of that, we were always able to raise money. So we raised over $1 billion in capital, and we did it with top flight investors. And ultimately, we're able to deliver, 1,000% IRR back, in about 4 years from when they put their money in. I realize that's crazy. Like I understand that, but my point is simply do things the right way, and manage expectations appropriately, and people will generally, ultimately, let things ride a little bit more than if you try to go a little bit too strong on how perfect everything's going to be. I mean, you got to sell the story, but temper it. Temper it's what I learned, and never forsake your credibility for a short-term raise. It'll catch you in the end.
That's a great message, and certainly the credibility you had built through multiple companies helped. As I think that's an important element. But generally, under Paragon we have 7 companies. You've built many companies here in Chicago, raised capital. We've been able to raise it in Chicago. Yet there's still a belief Chicago is very difficult to raise capital and build companies. What do you think that perceptions? Why does that exist? What is more difficult about Chicago? What is your thoughts about that?
Well, I think Chicago traditionally has been big pharma and spec pharma. There really hasn't been biotech in Chicago. It's been very rare. So I think number one, there's been a relative lack of management, and we can talk about that in a second. The differences in the management phenotypes, and there's also, to me, the Chicago capital is more cash flow focused, as opposed to VCs and biotech they're not cash flow focused, right? They can't be. It's a longer game. So personally, I think that the elements are there, right? We've got the technologies, we've got the universities, we've got the talent. It's a function of starting a company. I think you have to have the right couple people on the management team. So I think it's going to require some people that have been there and done that to get people comfortable, number one. And number two, it's either getting capital from people here that are willing to step outside the lines a little bit of what they're used to, or, and I think this is a definite opportunity in the shorter term, the money from New York or San Francisco or Boston will come to Chicago if there's good technology and if they're comfortable with the management team. I mean, I think multiple.
We're both doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely examples of that, and there's another company in Chicago right now called Levo. It started, orphan company. They've got great investors, from New York. They're investors in our company. That to me is an example of, I'm really rooting for them, because if they're successful, particularly that money that's in there right now, they're going to be now completely agnostic as to wherever they put their money in Chicago. They're going to say Chicago's fine. And it's like anything. It's a pretty small group of people, right? They're going to talk to their 5 best friends and say, there's opportunities in Chicago. We're comfortable with it. This is now the 3rd company that we've done there. It's done very, very well. And the more success we have in Chicago, then you're going to have more management teams to pull from. more folks that have bridged this big pharma and startup situation, that it's easier to form the appropriate management team construct to be successful, as a startup here in Chicago. So I'm optimistic. I think things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have all the pieces, great research, great institutions. The big pharma talent that's here is as good as anywhere in the country, and that's critical because you need world-class talent that's been trained by the best institutional programs. And on top of it, we do have a good mindset. Look, Chicago was built with entrepreneur mindset. We were built after a fire and from nothing. So it's in our culture to do this. But we need more successful companies. We probably had 8 to 10 companies come out of Ovation, companies that now, and we talked about all the talent that could come from AveXis. Mm-hmm. We're going to need you to come back, Sean, and do another one as well. One of the questions I got, which I think is great, is, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the group, and it looks so easy. You raised this as 1,000 times, and great return, incredible return for your investors. Yet it wasn't always that easy. So one of the questions is, talk about some of the toughest times as you built your company. And one you brought up tonight, where we got news a week or two before a drug was about to get approved, and we were about to sell that company. So we had all these things were built up, and then we get the news that there's white spots on the brain, and we had to go back and put a program together to go meet with the FDA. It took a year,
right.
But we locked arms and said, "Who's in?" And we all, worked hard night and day and made it work. You want to talk about another one of those experiences that you may have run into as you were building your companies?
Well, I think the hardest is getting it off the ground. I mean, I remember sitting at my desk in my house, and so you just joined the company. Your 3 employees live in a different state. They really don't know what you're talking about. You have to hire people, and you've told the board you're going to hire great people. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't even have any benefits. Like, I accepted the job. I'm like, we don't even have a benefits package. So I remember being on the phone with some benefits consultant trying to get this coordinated. And then the next phone call was to one of the investors, and I was giving an update on how we were moving things forward. And my dogs are barking in the background at the mailman. And I just remember hanging up the phone thinking, it's got to be better than this. This is bad. We got to move it forward pretty quickly. And it just reinforced how you have to get those people in early, and you got to have the trust. I mean, there's multiple examples of things that go bad, like you said, but I think that first 6 to 12 months is
right.
It's nonstop work, right? I mean, you are where everything comes and goes, and if the more organized you can be and disciplined about moving it forward and hiring some key people up front, that makes all the difference in the world. I think the worst thing is you get caught into that spooling of, boy, I have so much to do, but I can't get anything done. That's the danger zone.
Right. But we joked earlier, those early days are often the most fun.
Yeah,
when every day you're doing 10 different things and you watch there's such a good trajectory when you're building it out. One of the questions is, you talked about great investors. What differentiates great versus good investors or not good investors?
Well, I always like the investors that are in it for the long term.
Yep.
And I think it's folks that, first of all, that is their mindset, right? They're not here to flip it at the IPO. So figuring out who those people are. But the ones that have a track record, like anything, of picking successful companies and working with management. I mean, so I always wanted to the best of my ability, see if you could get investors that were generally supportive of management versus trying to, control everything. And in my experience, every VC has its own culture, right? And again, I won't name names, but there were a couple where you sit down and talk to them, and they said, well, you got to move your company to Boston. And I said, why? Well, if we're going to invest in you, we're going to be at your company every day, and we're going to be making sure you guys are doing what you say you're going to be doing. And I just left and went, check that one off the list. That's not going to work. But then there's other ones that say, listen, we're going to be right sometimes, we're going to be wrong sometimes, but ultimately we're going to trust the management team to do what they say, and as long as they're being transparent, we'll work with them. And there's everyone's got their own reputation. So I think it's ones that are ultimately reasonable and have a good track record, and that you can be honest with. I mean, I was always very transparent around, again, you can be more transparent before you're public, but basically letting them know, what I was concerned about and what I was doing about it, and if I needed their help on something, then ask for it. I mean, the sooner you can build trust, goes back to the credibility, the more rope you get.
Right. That's great advice, and I would agree. I often say it's like a marriage. With your investment partner, you're in it together, and you may not always have perfect alignment. You got to figure it out. But it's also with key employees, same thing. Mm-hmm. These are relationships that you're building that are very important. And it's a lot more enjoyable when you have relationships that are working and are going well.
Absolutely.
So we just have a couple more minutes here. We're 6:57. As you think about, as you've built these companies, as you've grown your career, what are some of the key thoughts you have to others who are building their career, whether it's going in to work for a company like AveXis when they're employee number 5? Because I often say, if you're one of the earliest employees, you're an entrepreneur too.
Oh, yeah.
Not just the guy that starts it. You're also an entrepreneur. So what advice do you have for those, maybe somebody in the audience at a big company and they're looking to make a move, or somebody that wants to start a company in the life science field?
I would say first and foremost, believe in yourself. You've got to believe in what you're doing, particularly if you're the person that's starting the company or you're early on. You have to believe that what you're doing is going to be beneficial, is going to be successful, and that you can help make that happen. So you have to have that belief that you can get it done, because if you don't, no one else will believe you. Number 2, I really feel strongly that you have to be very self-aware, and you have to know what you don't know. The most dangerous thing, in my opinion, is the person that thinks they know everything. And I've yet to meet the person that knows everything, but I'm sure we've all encountered people that think they know everything. And that can be very dangerous, particularly if it's the person that's in charge. And so to me, it goes back to this healthy environment of saying, I don't, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. Does someone else? Because if you make the mistake, you can create the company, and it's unconscionable to me that you do that because of you're just blindly confident of yourself. So you need to be confident, but you need to be self-aware. I think those are 2 things. And the last one is, you really have to trust the people that you hire, hold them accountable, but if you hired the right people, trust them to do their job. At a certain point, if things continue to progress, the company's too big for you to do everything and to oversee everything. So you've got to adjust your management style. So part of this is being flexible and adaptive to where you are. Otherwise, you're really gonna restrain the growth and the ability to recognize value because you're a control freak. So it's hard because most of us in the room are control freaks, but how do you manage yourself so that you can let your good people do the work that they need to do. So that's it.
That's great advice. You know, one of the last questions I had on here, and I wouldn't ask this to everybody, but I remember you worked very hard, but you did a good job of balancing. The question is, how do you balance work and family? You had a young family when we were working together, and you've been able to balance it very nicely. You want to talk about that? How you?
Yeah, listen, I don't know anyone can really balance it, right? I mean, everyone talks about work-life balance. It's super hard. I think the best thing that I was able to do is, you know, my wife's fantastic, and we did everything together. In that, like as an example, when I was working in Texas or I was working in San Francisco, we had a discussion first and foremost of what's this going to look like. We didn't want to move the kids, right? They were in high school. That would have been, I would have been the dad without kids to talk to them, so that wasn't really an option. So you have to be real around, hey, it looks like I'd be gone 4 nights a week, effectively. Can we do this? Is this going to work? Because what that does to your spouse is it puts a lot of pressure on them to deal with the kids, to deal with the homework, to deal with the sports, and you know maybe they're working too, right? So first of all, it's just this is a we decision on how you're going to do things. Secondly, with the kids, it's the same thing. Here's what's going to happen. I mean, trust me, I love spending a Saturday at the soccer field or the ballpark or anything, like more than anything. But telling the kids, here's kind of what's going on, and here's what we're going to do about it, and at least up front, getting everyone to recognize what it's going to be, and then to your best of your ability, you know, when you're home, be home. I mean, one of the things that was nice about the commute was, you know, when you came home on Thursday night, you really had 3 days to kind of, you know, be with the family, essentially, where sometimes even, you know, when you're home every night, it's harder in a way. So what I've learned over the course of time is just everyone in this room is super driven. You're never going to be able to have good work-life balance, in my opinion. It's like it's like chasing windmills. You're just never going to get it. But what you can do is, you know, take time. I mean, take a day off here and there. You know, leave the phone at home if you're going to go to the soccer field. I mean, it'll be little things, but there's no great answer. I mean, if you're trying to create something like you're trying to create, it's hard. I think the best thing you can do is have an understanding family, frankly, and recognize you're probably being distant and probably a little short sometimes, but I think if you say sorry and you mean it, you'll probably get a bit of a reprieve.
Well, great. Well, listen, Sean, I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for coming out and doing this today.
Well, thank you all. Thank you.
Congratulations.